It was the kind of laugh that doesn't belong in a house full of secrets. Sharp, effortless, a little too loud. It echoed from the dining room while I was in the garage, carrying up a folding chair because Laurel insisted we might need one more just in case. That chair never got used. From the garage door I paused. I could hear them. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, my daughters chatting about school, and then that laugh again. Came from my wife. But it wasn't for me. You can tell when someone's laugh is real, not just because of how it sounds, but because of who it's meant for. That laugh? It was aimed at someone else. And somehow that hurt more than shouting ever could. I walked back in, chair still in hand, and that's when I saw him. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew. He was sitting next to Laurel, wearing my wine glass, my air, my family's attention like it was tailored for him. He was younger, not by a lot, but enough to sting. Confident in the way only someone who hasn't had to apologize in years can be. His hand was on the back of her chair, too comfortable, too familiar. Laurel didn't look up when I came in. She just kept laughing, leaned slightly toward him, like gravity itself had changed direction. It was supposed to be a dinner for Macy, our daughter, to celebrate her getting into an advanced STEM camp. I'd spent 3 days preparing everything. I ordered her favorite takeout, printed name cards, even cleaned the grout in the guest bathroom because Laurel said her boss might be coming. Her boss. But this wasn't her boss. No one introduced him. They just kept talking like I wasn't there. I stood there holding that folding chair like an idiot, not sure if I was supposed to offer it, set it down, or throw it across the room. My face must have flushed because my oldest daughter, Nora, gave me a weird look. The kind a kid gives you when they know something's wrong but they're too afraid to ask. I slid the chair back into the hallway and quietly took my seat. Across the table, the man looked at me, finally, and nodded. No smile. No nice to meet you. Just a nod like you'd give a waiter or a valet. I don't remember much of what was said after that. The conversations blurred into white noise. I kept staring at Laurel's hand, the one with our wedding band, resting on the table inches from his. Every so often, she'd tap his wrist lightly when she laughed. Her fingers brushed his sleeve once, and I felt it in my throat, like swallowing a jagged stone. The room was warm, but I was cold. At one point, I tried to speak up. I started a sentence, something about Macy's robotics project, but Laurel cut me off mid-word. Not rudely, not loudly, just enough to make me feel unnecessary, like background furniture. Then came dessert. She brought it out with him. Together. They were in the kitchen for too long, whispering, then laughing again before emerging with plates in hand like a co-hosting couple on a lifestyle show. I waited for someone to ask, "So who's the mystery guest?" No one did. And I realized they knew. All of them. Or at least enough of them to make me the punchline. Laurel's mother smiled at him. Her cousin offered him the last piece of cake. Macy looked between me and him like she was trying to understand something in real time. And I just sat there, in my own home, at my own table, watching my wife pour wine for her lover. There was no dramatic music, no slow-motion betrayal, just the dull weight of humiliation settling over me like fog. That's when I stood up, slowly, without saying a word, and walked outside. Into the yard. Into the silence. I could still hear her laughing through the window. And in that moment I knew she didn't expect me to do anything. But I would. And what I did next, it left her crying in the street, begging me to just come back inside. The night air did nothing to calm me. I stood on the lawn for what felt like hours, watching the golden glow of our dining room spill through the window like it was mocking me. Inside, laughter continued, muffled but constant, like I'd accidentally wandered off the set of my own life and someone else had taken over my role. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but something inside me cracked, slowly and with purpose. A quiet, controlled fracture, like ice under pressure. I should have walked away, driven off, stayed in a motel or crashed at my brother's place. But I didn't. Instead, I walked back inside, calm and steady, with the same dead look you'd expect from someone attending their own wake. I didn't go to Laurel. I didn't even look at River, the man whose name I still hadn't heard spoken out loud. I walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed a clean wine glass, and filled it with the unopened bottle of Pinot Noir I'd been saving for our anniversary. The room quieted slightly, not fully but enough for the energy to shift. Laurel watched me from the head of the table, eyes uncertain now. River glanced at her, then at me, his smug confidence not quite as smug anymore. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising the glass. Laurel opened her mouth, probably to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. "To family," I began, voice steady, even warm. "To the people who stand beside you when things are good, and the ones who stay when everything falls apart." I paused. "To daughters who shine brighter than we deserve. To mothers who pretend not to notice what's right in front of them. And to guests who come uninvited and stay longer than they should." A few uneasy chuckles. My daughter Macy blinked slowly. Nora looked down at her plate. Laurel sat frozen, gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "And lastly," I said, turning directly toward her, "to wives who forget who built the table they're laughing around." I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. But the silence that followed was so complete, it felt like sound itself had been sucked from the room. I placed the glass on the table. Didn't drink it. Just walked over to the hallway, grabbed the suitcase I'd quietly packed an hour before dinner, and rolled it to the middle of the room. "I won't make a scene," I said calmly. "I already did the math. The house is in my name. The utilities, the mortgage. The only thing not mine here is the woman who forgot how to look me in the eyes." Laurel stood up finally. "Hal, can we please go talk?" "No," I cut in. "We had years to talk. You spent them whispering to him." River stood up too now, clearly uncomfortable. "Hey man, this isn't the time." "No, you don't speak here." My voice was low but sharp. "You walked into my home. You disrespected me in front of my children. And you're gonna walk right back out." "I didn't mean out," I snapped, this time with a touch of heat. "Before I decide to forget, I'm a decent man." He hesitated, then grabbed his coat. Laurel tried to stop him, grabbed his wrist. And when she did, our youngest daughter gasped. It was the sound that finally broke something. Laurel realized the girls were seeing everything now. That this wasn't just about me anymore. It was exposure, raw and complete, and it was her doing. I turned to Macy and Nora. My voice softened. "I'm sorry you had to see this. None of this is your fault. You're smart, you're strong, and you deserve better examples." Then I looked at Laurel one last time. Not with anger, with pity. "You planned this night thinking you were introducing someone to our family. But you didn't. You just showed them who you really are." I rolled the suitcase to the front door, opened it, and walked out into the cold. As the door closed behind me, I heard the first sound of real emotion from her that night. She was crying. In the street, just like the title of this story promised. But the truth is, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life back. But sometimes the only way to reclaim your life is to burn the part that betrayed you. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. The motel room was cold, dim, and smelled faintly of old coffee and synthetic air freshener. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun pointlessly, like my thoughts. Every few hours I'd check my phone. Not because I expected a message, but because I kept wondering if I wanted one. I didn't, and yet, I still checked. When the sun finally crept in through the crooked blinds, I felt like I had aged 10 years in one night. I washed my face in lukewarm water, stared at my reflection, and barely recognized the man looking back. Puffy eyes, scruff that had outgrown its welcome, and this heavy stillness in my chest that wouldn't go away. By 7:20 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Macy, Dad, can we talk? Alone?" I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the message like it was a riddle I wasn't ready to solve. But 15 minutes later, I texted her back and asked if she could meet me at the diner on Broad Street. It was halfway between the house and the motel, and more importantly, it was neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there. Hoodie, hair in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked more like a child than I remembered. The kind of small you only notice when your world has been shattered and you're desperate to hold on to anything familiar. She didn't speak at first, just stared into her mug of tea, stirring it even though nothing had been added. "I didn't want Nora to come," she said finally. "She's not ready. I don't think she knows what she saw last night." I nodded, unsure what to say. The weight of being a father in this moment, the kind that's supposed to have answers, was crushing. "Was that guy? Is that who Mom's been with?" The question didn't come with anger. Came with confusion, with heartbreak, and it felt like a punch to the lungs. "I think so," I said quietly. "I don't know how long it's been going on, but yes, that's who he is." She didn't cry. She didn't scream, but her hands trembled around the mug. "I thought you guys were okay," she whispered. "You weren't fighting. You weren't broken." I looked at her, eyes burning, throat tightening. "I thought that too." She finally looked up, and the weight of her stare was worse than anything Laurel had done. "Why would she bring him to dinner, Dad?" she asked. "Why would she do that to us?" I had no answer. None that made sense. Because the truth was, this wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. She hadn't just cheated. She'd paraded him into our family's most sacred space, during a night meant to honor our daughter. It was calculated, or careless. I didn't know which hurt more. "I don't think she thought anyone would say anything," I said slowly. "I think she believed we'd all just let it happen, that I wouldn't push back, that I'd stay silent to keep the peace." "But why you?" Macy asked, almost pleading. "Why would she treat you like that?" And I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. I'd spent our entire marriage trying not to rock the boat. I compromised. I sacrificed. I made myself smaller so she could shine. And she used that silence as a shield to hide her disrespect. "Because I let her," I admitted. "Because I thought being a good husband meant letting her be the star. And I never realized she stopped seeing me as a person. I became background noise." Macy was quiet for a long time after that. Then she did something unexpected. She reached across the table and held my hand. "I saw what you did last night," she said. "And it meant everything. You didn't yell. You didn't throw anything. You just told the truth. And you walked away." Tears hit my eyes before I could stop them. She squeezed my hand. "You didn't lose last night, Dad. You won. You just don't feel it yet." We sat there like that for a while, two people clinging to the wreckage of something we both thought was unshakable. She was my daughter, but in that moment, she held me up more than I held her. When we finally stood to leave, she said one last thing that stuck with me all day. "Whatever happens next, promise me one thing. Don't go back. Not for her. Not for comfort. Not because it's easier. We'll be okay. But only if you are." I nodded, and I meant it. But deep down, I knew the next storm was already forming. Because Laurel wasn't going to let go without a fight. And I wasn't done uncovering the truth. I hadn't planned to go back to the house so soon. Part of me hoped I never would. But that same afternoon, a text came through from Laurel, short, cold, and deeply familiar. "I boxed your things. Pick them up before Sunday. I'll be out for the evening." No apology. No remorse. Just logistics, like she was managing a calendar invite, not a family implosion. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, fingers twitching to type 1,000 things I'd regret. But I didn't respond. I just stared at the timestamp and thought, she didn't even ask how the girls are doing. By 5 p.m., I was parked out front. The house looked the same, but something about it felt hostile, as if it already belonged to someone else, as if the walls themselves had turned their backs on me. I stepped inside and everything was unnaturally clean. Too clean. Like a crime scene scrubbed down before the detectives arrived. She had rearranged the living room. My books were gone from the shelves. The framed photo of our family that once sat above the fireplace had been replaced by a minimalist canvas that said, "Breathe." The irony made my jaw clench. My clothes were boxed neatly in the front hallway. Too neatly. Pressed. folded, labeled. A performance of decency. As if tidiness could erase what she'd done. I wasn't going to linger, but something in me, a quiet pull, somewhere between anger and curiosity, told me to go upstairs. One last look. One last breath in the space where I used to sleep beside a stranger. The bedroom felt colder than I remembered. More impersonal. Like a showroom pretending to be a life. I sat on the edge of the bed and just looked around. Not for answers, but for something to hold on to. Something real. And that's when I noticed it. The nightstand on her side of the bed was slightly ajar. Laurel was obsessive about details. She never left drawers open. Ever. I don't know what possessed me to reach for it. Maybe I shouldn't have. But I did. Inside were things I wasn't supposed to see. A burner phone. Not a second phone. A burner. Cheap. Plastic. No case. No ID. I stared at it like it had bitten me. Beside it, in a sealed envelope, was a printed itinerary plane tickets. One was in Laurel's name. The other, River D. My throat dried. My pulse quickened. The departure date? Next week. A 7-day trip to Lisbon. Non-refundable. Booked months ago. So that was the plan. That's why she invited him to dinner. She had been soft-launching her next life. In front of me. In front of our children. Preparing to leave and wanted it to feel like it was no big deal. A natural transition. Not betrayal, just evolution. There was more. Notes. Scribbled messages on the back of a used envelope. Don't forget to tell Hal before we go? Or do I just ghost him? You said you'd handle it before the dinner. You're hesitating again. Be decisive, babe. Babe. The word stung more than anything. And suddenly everything made sense. The laughter, the flowers, the way he looked at me like I wasn't real. I wasn't a person to them. I was just the final obstacle. I took photos of everything. Every ticket, every note, every message. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I just needed to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That this wasn't a misunderstanding, but a full-scale erasure of me. I closed the drawer. Slowly, quietly. Then I stood in the middle of that too-perfect room and laughed once. Just once, because the absurdity of it all finally broke through the fog. She had turned our life into a soft exit strategy. Like I was a contract expiring. And River? He wasn't just a mistake. He was plan A. I left the house with my boxes, my dignity, and a phone full of receipts. I didn't text her. I didn't tell the girls yet. I didn't even scream. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Because if she wanted to start her new life so casually, she was about to learn the hard way. There's nothing casual about being exposed. I didn't sleep again that night, but this time it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was clarity. An eerie, weightless calm that settled over me like fog on a quiet lake. The pain wasn't gone. Far from it, but something in my body had stopped flinching. The wound was still open, yes, but I was no longer bleeding out. I was thinking, and that was worse for Laurel than anything else I could have done in anger. By morning, I had a plan. Not revenge. That's what people say when they want to hurt back. No, this was something different. I wasn't going to throw her things on the lawn or scream through her voicemail. I was going to hold up a mirror. Clear one. So she could see exactly who she had become. Not just in private, but in the same performative spotlight she loved so much. I called Macy, told her and Nora to stay with their aunt for the week. No explanations yet, just a simple, firm request. Macy didn't ask questions. I think she knew I was protecting them from something they weren't meant to carry. Then I made 3 stops. First, a local print shop. I had the flight itinerary, texts, and burner phone logs printed and bound. Not in a messy, chaotic stack, no. I had them formatted like a corporate briefing. Clean font. Titled, Project, Freedom. Because I knew that's the word Laurel used when she talked about leaving me behind. Second, I stopped by Laurel's nonprofit office. I knew the receptionist. She liked me. I asked if Laurel was in today. She was perfect. I left the binder with her, labeled, For Laurel. Extremely time-sensitive. I asked that it be delivered at noon. Precisely. Third, I booked a table at a restaurant. The same one where Laurel had her promotion party 2 years ago, the night she gave a toast about loyalty being the most underrated form of love. I called the manager, told him I wanted to reserve their private room for a family gathering. I gave him a guest list of exactly 4 people: Laurel, her mother, her boss, and River, all invited under different pretexts, all unaware of the other's attendance. It was cruel, maybe, but it wasn't loud. It was surgical. By the time 6:30 rolled around, I was already seated when they began to arrive. One by one, confused, pleasantly surprised, and completely unprepared. I greeted each of them with a smile that probably looked warmer than it should have. Laurel walked in last, fashionably late as always, wearing a slate gray dress and that same calculated confidence she wore like perfume. Her smile faltered when she saw me. Then she noticed her boss, her mother, and River. She didn't sit. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, already pulling out her phone. "No," I replied, calm and clear. "There's been a correction." I stood and placed a single envelope on the table in front of her. Inside were copies of everything: the flight plans, the burner phone log, the emails, even the receipts for the Lisbon Airbnb. The silence in the room was absolute. Her boss looked pale. Her mother looked confused. River looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Laurel," I said, still not raising my voice, "this is the exit you wanted. You just didn't expect it to be public. You counted on my silence, my compliance, the same silence you used for years. But tonight, there's no silence, just truth." She opened the envelope with shaking fingers. I watched her eyes dart across the pages. She tried to speak, tried to pivot, but her mother was the first to speak. "You planned a vacation with him while still living with hell?" she said, disgust bleeding into every word. Laurel looked at me like she was drowning. "You're making this into a spectacle." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You did. When you brought him to dinner. When you laughed in my home. When you looked at me like I was disposable." Her boss stood, clearly uncomfortable, and excused himself. River stayed frozen. And Laurel, for the first time in our entire marriage, had no script, no fallback, just the crumbling facade of someone who thought control and love were the same thing. I turned to leave, but before I did, I said one final thing. Not for her, but for me. "I don't hate you. I just don't know you. And I don't want to know who you've become." Then I walked out. No yelling, no chaos, just footsteps on tile. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her to tell me who I was. I already knew. I didn't go home after the dinner. I didn't even go back to the motel. Instead, I drove without destination, winding through empty neighborhoods and past sleeping houses. Families inside, still intact, unaware that one of their own was unraveling everything for a plane ticket and a fantasy. Somewhere around 1 a.m., I parked in front of the same elementary school where Macy used to ride her bike along the sidewalk cracks like they were race lanes. I sat there for an hour in silence, just breathing. The next morning, my phone erupted. Dozens of missed calls, texts, voicemails, all from Laurel. She didn't write full messages, just fragments. Panic typed through trembling fingers. "Hal, please talk to me. What you did was cruel. You don't understand what I've been going through. Please don't tell the girls more than they need to know." And then one that stopped me cold. "If this gets out at work, I'll lose everything." That told me all I needed to know. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I made a mistake." Not even "let's talk." Just fear. For her reputation. For her job. For the image she'd worked so carefully to curate over the years. Polished, compassionate, adored. The kind of person who gave inspiring speeches and ran charity events while secretly plotting an escape from her family life. But the real fallout came later that week. I told no one about the restaurant except the 4 who were there. I didn't post anything. I didn't gossip. I didn't need to. Word spreads in quiet, insidious ways when the people involved live in a world built on appearances. Laurel's boss didn't need to reprimand her. He simply started distancing himself. Meetings she once led were reassigned. Her role was restructured. She wasn't fired, not technically, but everyone saw what happened. And in places like hers, silence is just a different kind of execution. What I didn't expect was the call from her mother. Came on a Friday morning. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. She didn't yell. She didn't defend her daughter. She just asked me one question, gently, as if she'd rehearsed it. Did you know this wasn't the first time? My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, I asked. She sighed, long and low, like it hurt to speak. Back when you two were newly married, there was someone. I found out by accident. Confronted her. She swore it was over and begged me never to tell you. Said she was scared you'd leave and she'd have nothing. I believed her, and I never thought I'd see her make the same mistake again. I didn't even know how to respond. I just sat there, mouth slightly open, staring at the wall as if the paint would explain everything. She always had this idea, her mother continued, that love was supposed to be thrilling, dangerous. She once told me you were too safe, that she was grateful but not excited. There it was, too safe, the thing I'd always feared but never heard out loud. And yet, for years I wore that badge proudly. I kept the lights on. I showed up. I remembered anniversaries. I sat through dull dinners with her board members. I was safe, not because I lacked ambition, but because I believed stability was love's greatest gift. I thanked her mother quietly and ended the call, heart pounding like a drum, not from rage, from a kind of grief that didn't even have a name yet. I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost the illusion of who she'd ever been. This wasn't a betrayal born in recent months. This was a long-term campaign, quiet, patient erosion, and it made what I was about to do even more necessary. That evening I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Deborah who came recommended by a friend. She reviewed the documents, the burner phone, the messages, the trip plans. She didn't flinch once. This won't be messy if you don't let it, she said plainly. But if she fights you, we go nuclear. This evidence? This is surgical. No judge will side with her. I didn't want war. I wasn't chasing vengeance. But I was no longer willing to be erased. I was done carrying the weight of someone else's secrets while pretending we still shared a future. Laurel texted again that night. Can we meet privately? Please. I stared at it for a long time, then typed one line. We can meet, but we won't pretend anymore. We met at a neutral cafe downtown. She looked hollowed out, not from sadness, but from fear, like someone who had been caught in the spotlight without her mask. She tried to play the victim at first, said she was overwhelmed, said the stress of parenting and work made her confused. She called River a mistake, said she'd ended it after the dinner. I asked her why she still had the plane tickets. She went silent. I didn't expect you to explode like that, she muttered. I didn't explode, I said. That's what scares you, isn't it? That I didn't. She looked at me with something between awe and resentment. She had always counted on my passivity, my politeness, the fact that I'd never throw a scene. And now that I had chosen a quieter, more focused kind of defiance, it unsettled her more than any outburst ever could. I'll agree to whatever's fair, she said finally. I just want this to be clean. I nodded. Then sign the papers when they come. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't comfort her. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because this was the first time in years I realized she didn't get to cry on my shoulder anymore. I thought I had seen the worst of it. After everything, the affair, the staged dinner, the burner phone, the vacation plans, and even her mother's confession about her past, I believed I was through the storm. The divorce paperwork was in progress. The kids were staying with me most nights. Laurel kept her distance, careful now, cautious in her tone, trying to maintain the last slivers of dignity she could salvage. I was healing in my own quiet way. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't empowering. I wasn't running marathons or discovering new passions like people say they do in motivational breakup speeches. I was just functioning again, brushing my teeth twice a day, sleeping without grinding my teeth, laughing at dumb sitcoms without guilt. That was enough for now. Then, one morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. No name. Just a single sheet of paper, typed. No signature. It said, "If you want the full story, ask Laurel about the cabin in Bellwood. Summer 2019. She knows exactly what she did." At first, I thought it was a prank. Or worse, a sick attempt by someone who had heard whispers of our story and wanted to inject chaos. I tossed the letter aside, but something about it burrowed into me. Bellwood. That name gnawed at my memory until it finally clicked. Laurel had once mentioned a staff retreat upstate that summer. I remember because I stayed home with Nora, who had strep throat, and Laurel had left early, saying she needed to reset before the new quarter. I never questioned it. Not then. She came back with a tan and new energy. I had even told her she looked radiant. God, what a fool I was. I didn't call her. I didn't ask. Instead, I drove there. It took 3 hours to get to Bellwood. The town was tiny, tucked in the woods like it had secrets buried under every pine needle. I stopped at a diner, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, and casually asked the waitress if there had been any corporate retreats around here in the past few years. She didn't miss a beat. "You mean the charity folks from downstate?" "Yeah, they used to come out to the redwood cabins every summer. Big group. Loud. Lots of wine." "Still do?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nah. Not since the big blow-up a few years back. Something about a fight? Cops were called. Some guy got arrested for drunk driving the next morning. Real mess." That was enough. I drove out to redwood cabins. They were locked up for the season, but the property wasn't gated. I parked by the tree line, walked down to the lake, and stood there, just absorbing it. The place was beautiful, tranquil, the kind of place you go to let go of responsibility and pretend life is something else for a weekend. And suddenly I saw it, her handwriting, on the side of cabin 4, etched faintly into the wood under the window frame, was a message scratched in with a key or a knife. L+R, we existed here. My stomach flipped. It was her handwriting. I knew it like my own. The way she looped her LS. The way the ampersand tilted slightly to the right. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a confession carved into wood and left behind like a scar. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at that letter again, then texted Laurel 2 words. Cabin. Bellwood. It took her 10 minutes to respond. Long enough for me to know she was crafting her answer. "I knew you'd find out eventually. Please don't do this over text. Let me explain." There it was. Not denial. Not confusion. Just surrender. I called her. She answered with a cracked voice. "Hal, I didn't want to lie about that part. I just didn't know how to come back from it." "Who was he?" I asked. "Someone from work. He's not around anymore. He was married too. It was a mistake. One of those things where you think you're alive for a moment, and you forget that everything else still exists." I almost dropped the phone. "You carved your initials into a cabin wall, Laurel. That's not forgetting. That's memorializing." She didn't respond. Silence again, her favorite form of cowardice. "You've been cheating longer than you've been faithful," I whispered. "That's not true. Don't," I cut in. "Don't insult me with more curated truth. You said you didn't want to hurt me, but what you really meant was, you didn't want to be the one caught holding the knife." She cried, but this time the sound didn't move me. Felt staged. Not malicious, just shallow. Like someone crying over the end of a chapter, not the destruction of a life. "I want to be a better mother," she said. "Even if we can't fix us, I want to be good for them." "You start by telling them the truth," I said. "And you don't make me carry your shame anymore." I ended the call before she could say anything else. That night, I took a walk with Macy. I told her everything. Not the graphic details, but the full truth. That this wasn't a one-time mistake. That Laurel had been living a double life for years. Macy didn't cry. She just walked beside me quietly, and then said something I'll never forget. "You always told me to look for someone who's consistent. I didn't know you meant it like this." And I knew then, I hadn't lost everything. Not even close. The final court date came on a rainy Thursday. Fitting, in a way. Laurel wore black, as if mourning something she'd already buried. I wore a gray suit I hadn't put on since a wedding 5 years ago. It didn't quite fit, but that seemed appropriate. Nothing in my life did anymore. Not in the way it used to. The proceeding was quick, clean, emotionless. Deborah handled everything with surgical precision. Laurel didn't contest a single point. She didn't even look at me until the judge banged the gavel and said the words that ended our marriage in less time than it took to order lunch. Afterward, she approached me in the hallway carefully, like she knew better than to presume anything now. "I meant what I said," she whispered. "I'm going to try, for the girls." I nodded, not out of forgiveness, not because I believed her, but because I needed her to know she didn't get to break everything and hold the last word. My silence was mine now, a boundary, not a weakness. Outside the courthouse, I stood in the misty rain and let it wash over me like a quiet baptism. Not in the dramatic, cinematic sense, but in the real, raw way where you feel something heavy lifting for the first time in years and you finally realize how much you'd been carrying. That night, Macy and Nora and I cooked dinner together. Pasta. Too much garlic. Way too much cheese. Nora made a playlist of all the songs she loved in middle school, and we danced barefoot in the kitchen like idiots. I hadn't laughed that hard in months. And when I looked at them, I saw something I didn't expect. Not brokenness, not confusion, not pity. I saw peace. Later, Macy came into the living room with a photo album I hadn't touched since the move. "I was thinking," she said, curling up next to me on the couch. "Maybe we could make a new one. A fresh start. Just us." She didn't mean it to be profound, but it hit me like a brick. Because that's what I was doing, wasn't it? Slowly, imperfectly, stitching together a new life from the wreckage of an old one. A life where truth wasn't feared, where love wasn't performative, and where safety wasn't boring. It was earned. I still get letters sometimes. Not anonymous ones. Messages from friends, neighbors, people who heard the story through whispers and wanted to say something kind. Some shared their own betrayals. Others just said they were rooting for me. One even wrote, "You didn't just walk away. You walked towards something better." And they were right, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of pretending someone else was the main character in it. So if you're reading this or listening right now, wondering if you'll ever come back from something like this, I want to tell you something clearly. You don't need to be perfect to begin again. You just need to be honest enough to stop pretending. Thanks for joining us today on Reddit Confessions. If you've ever faced a moment where someone showed you who they really were, and you chose yourself instead, we'd love to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments and let us know. What was the moment you knew it was time to walk away? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another true story from the heart. Until next time, keep your head up, your heart honest, and your standards high.